The previous video was somewhat theoretical, admittedly. It really was just designed to help us understand the nature of the relationship between the inheritance between the parent and the child. And honestly, this video is a little bit theoretical too, a little bit more practical, but still a little bit theoretical. We're going to talk about a concept called method hiding, and it's used very infrequently. In fact, I've never seen this used in the wild. All I've seen it used is in books and examples online. But I still want you to at least be aware of what this is, because who knows, it might pop up on a job interview or when you're reading somebody else's code. So I want to call your attention to the two classes that we have here, labeled hopefully very obviously what they're doing or what their role is. We have a parent class and a child class. They both have method 1 and method 2 defined. The parent class has method 1 as a virtual method, and we're just printing out parent 1. And then the method 2 doesn't have any virtual keyword, and it's just printing out parent.2. In the child, we're inheriting from the parent class, and then we're going to override the method 1 with our own definition, child.1. And then we don't have the override keyword here, but we do get the little green squiggly that says that child 2 hides an inherited member, parent 2. Use the new keyword if hiding was intended. And so we'll come back to this in just a moment, but essentially here we have our own implementation, but we don't have the new keyword, which we'll look at in a moment, and we don't have the override keyword. All right. So what's going to happen here? We'll get to that in just a moment. Take a moment, pause the video, catch up with me, create these two classes in your own copy of Visual Studio. All right, and then you can see here how I'm actually just starting this project by creating an instance of parent, creating an instance of child, and they're calling their 1 and 2 methods respectively, and then printing them, which will print out the results to screen. And we get what we would probably anticipate, you know, parent.1, parent.2, because of lines 10 and 11. Then child.1, child.2, because of what we see in lines number 14 and 15. So far, so good, right? There's nothing here that's really earth-shattering or very crazy at this point. Well, so this is where things get a little bit crazy. We're going to talk about method hiding. And I'm going to cover this, again, for the sake of completeness, with a huge caveat that what I'm about to show you feels very wrong, and it's for those situations when you're really backed into a corner, so to speak. In other words, you shouldn't design your object interactions around what I'm about to show you, but it's probably useful to know. So what we're going to do here is create a third instance of, or a reference to the existing child. We could create a new one, but I'm just going to go ahead and borrow the reference to child. So var manchild equals, or actually let's get rid of the word var. I'm going to say, I'm going to create a parent called manchild. I want you to set it equal to the reference of child, but I want you to consider this as a parent, or when you work with it as if it was a parent, all right? So I think this is probably a pretty important thing to stop down on. We want to create an index card for the keyword or the operator as. And I don't want to spend too much time on it, but essentially the C# as operator is like a cast operation. As if we were going to try and completely convert a parent object into a child object. However, if the conversion isn't possible, it's going to return a null instead of throwing an exception. So that's why you use the as operator. And I don't want to get too deep into the as operator because it's closely related to a future course I'm going to create on working with types. And reflection inside of .NET. And this kind of deals with the challenges that you might face whenever you're trying to cast one type into another type, and the things you have to consider. So for now, just think of it as the right way to cast a child object or a parent object into one of its children types. Now, why you'd want to do that, we'll have to kind of come back to that in a little bit here after I explain the example. All right, so again, we're going to now implement the next part, which is the method hiding part. So what we'll do is go manchild dot 1. In fact, let me put that underneath this little delimiter, or this line that I've created here, just so we can see it distinguished from the other calls that we made. All right, so now let's go ahead and run the application. And this time the call to manchild.1 and manchild.2 yields the following. Here we're going to use child.1, that version, that overridden version of the one method to print out child.one. Okay, it was a child object. We want to treat it like a parent. However, it still is a child object fundamentally, and so we're going to use the child .one version of the method, right? But then when we call to, which version of the method are we going to call? Well, we get to the parent, but we said we wanted to treat this child as a parent, right? But it's still a child. So how does this work? Well, the key to this example, again, is this warning that we get here. Use the new keyword if hiding was intended. So hiding means that we want to hide this version of the method, and in this case, allow the parent's version of the method to shine through in certain situations. And this situation, this is the right circumstance where we want to ignore the child version of this method and revert back to the parent. So here, let me actually copy that, what I just said, and put that into the code example so that you can kind of refer back to this. So let's go right here, and I'm just going to paste that in. We're going to hide the child's version of the to method, and so we're basically saying under the right circumstance, ignore the child's version of this method and revert back to the parent. That's what's going on right here. In fact, this recommends that we use the new keyword. In this instance, in this context, the new keyword means, hey, hide me if you need to in certain situations. So in this case, even though we're dealing with a child reference, we're going to hide this method, the to method, because we said we use the new keyword. Now the difference between this with the green squiggly and this, it's exactly the same. The only reason you use the new keyword is just for readability's sake. It basically says to whoever comes later that this is what we intended to do. We intended to treat this to method and hide it under the right circumstance. So it just expresses your intent that, yeah, I know what I'm doing here. Don't worry. This was intentional. Okay. So here again, I want to stress that this is an extremely rare situation why you would ever want to do this. In fact, there were so many questions about this when it first came out years ago that it forced one of the developers of the C# language, Eric Lippert, to address this in a blog post. And so I want to paste this in here for you to read. And he explains the situations. He gives an example, at least, of a situation where it makes sense to use this kind of situation where you want to hide an implementation and let the parent shine through in this particular case, all right? But that's method hiding, and so again, because we have our definition here, right, let me paste in a good definition, at least in the source code. You probably want to create a card out of this, and I'll put it right here, and I'll go ahead and add comments to it. So method hiding, you can create a card called What is Method Hiding? Method hiding means hide this version of the method and allow the parent's version of the method to shine through. All right. And so hopefully, even if you don't understand why you'd ever want to do this, because I'll have to admit to you, I'm not entirely sure why it really would ever make sense for you to do something like this. It is possible to say, here I have something, I want to treat it as something in some cases, but in other cases I want to treat it like its parent or something else. All right. So at any rate, that's method hiding, and now we can say at least we talked about it, and let's move on and take a look at and move on into something a little bit more practical. All right, so we'll see you there in the next video. Thanks.